Well, welcome to the Connect Church Discipleship Podcast. Thank you for coming back. And we're in a series on prayer, fasting, and Sabbath. This is season 2, episode 12. And these are part of our overall season of season 2 with the disciplines that disciples engage in to help us be formed into who Christ is. And so today we'll talk about Sabbath. And I'm joined once again by Riley and Megan. Thank you, ladies. Back to back here. Appreciate you guys doing that. Your words have been helpful and your wisdom has been helpful. So thank you for that. And we're going to jump in here. Sabbath almost seems as like an outdated word. Like when I don't know, when I hear Sabbath, I don't know why I think like, I don't know, like 1853 or something like that. I don't know. It just seems like a very old word. But maybe it's because we're always connected and on the go and like it just seems like a different time period. But what comes to mind for you immediately when you think of the word Sabbath? What kind of images or words is that trigger for you?
Rest, staying home, maybe some light activities.
Sure. No, it's a great definition to it.
I was thinking immediately, and just because of where we live, like the Orthodox Jewish community is very prevalent where we live. So I immediately think of them when I think Sabbath, and I do think of I always see them walking around with their families and going to synagogue. So
yeah,
that's probably the first imagery that I think of.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me growing up, Sabbath was just always like, oh, you don't do anything all day and you just read the Bible, pray, and go to church. Like that was kind of like the idea that I had in my head. But over these last years, as I've been learning more, Sabbath is a gift from God. It's a gift that invites us to depend on the Lord, and kind of says, okay, put your striving to the side for the day and just be with God. One of the resources that we'll put in the show notes is John Mark Comer's Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's a great resource, so go ahead and pick that up and read that. But I love how he shows in that book how Sabbath was built into creation and was a gift right from the start of scriptures. But the most famous spot, maybe I don't know if it's the most famous, is in the Ten Commandments. We're told to honor the Lord with the Sabbath. And one of the things I like to think about the Ten Commandments, is specifically for this, is that was freedom, right? You have a people group that originally heard that were in slavery for 400 years. They probably had no days off. And now they're hearing you need to take a day a week just to rest. Like that was good news to them. And so something that we could sometimes see as restrictive, like, oh, the Lord wants me to slow down, I got so many things to do, is actually a blessing and freedom from the Lord. It's a gift. And one of the points John Mark makes in that book, he says in Genesis, he talks about the wording, and I had never noticed this before until he pointed out that and there was evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day. And I always think there's morning and then there's evening, not the other way around. But it's just the idea that I don't work to rest. I rest, and then out of that rest, I'm able to work. And so Sabbath is a gift. How have you seen Sabbath be a gift in your life?
I guess for me, we've practiced it more as a family than I ever did as a single person growing up or with the family that I was raised in. So it's been a gift of just getting that time to slow down and not do much and hang out with the kids with no agenda.
Yeah.
So
Sure, that is a gift. Riley, how have you seen that?
I think that Sabbath helps us to reprioritize because Sabbath is obviously biblical. So if we have too many things in our week that we're not able to Sabbath, shows us that maybe some of the things we are doing are not biblical or for this time. We need
Yeah.
to make more time and reprioritize so that we're able to sort the Lord better.
Sure, absolutely, right. And so again, this is a gift to us, and in all these last three that we've been talking about, prayer, fasting, and now Sabbath, we're talking about how Jesus is our model, right? And he practiced this. And there's a lot of passages about Jesus' interaction with the Sabbath, and I encourage you to dig into them. But in short, the leaders of that day made Sabbath something that it was not. They made it not about remembering our dependence on the Lord, but they made it more about keeping the rules. And so they enacted rules on top of rules on top of rules. I once read something that you can't carry something on the Sabbath that might make a little hole in the ground because a seed could fall into it and the seed could grow and it would be work, right? And so they kind of lost the heart of it. And so while we don't see any passages in scripture that's Jesus took a Sabbath on such and such date, we can certainly see in his life that he probably practiced it. Jesus was not a hurried person. He stops along the way for people, and he stops for interruptions many times. He lived a different pace of life that's very different for us, and had that dependence on the Lord. So let's talk about how we can practice Sabbath. And I heard someone put it this way before, that there's three aspects to Sabbath: worship, rest, and delight. And there's no manual on how to do those things, right? It's going to look for different people in different life stages and different seasons of life. And so what does Sabbath look like for you personally in the areas of worship, rest, and delight? What are some ways that that could take shape? Megan, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. I don't really know that like I ever like worship like you do on like a Sunday morning on Sabbath, but for the worship part, definitely I try to play worship music in the morning, in the house, and just kind of have the atmosphere in the house be more quieter and just focusing on God. But I don't know that I'm actually like doing what you would think would be quote unquote worship like in a church service. But
But it doesn't have to be,
yeah, it doesn't
right?
have
Like
to
like
be.
like Sabbath doesn't have to be a church service.
Yeah.
So expand
Yeah,
our mind on
because
that. It's
again,
good.
for the listeners, like my husband's a pastor, so we don't Sabbath on Sundays because that's a work day. So it is more Saturday that we try to do. So we are with the family, not in a church service, where a lot of other families maybe their Sabbath looks like going to church and worshiping corporately.
Yeah. So that's the worship aspect.
Yeah.
What does rest and delight look like?
Rest would be in the morning going slow, not being on a schedule, maybe letting your kids stay in pajamas all day, and just kind of have a family nap time is also
Where's it
fun.
going?
Or just family rest time. Let the kids rest and nap, and I'm going to read a book and sit on the couch with them.
Yeah.
And then delight was the last one. I feel like we've gotten away from this, but we used to try to do like fun family activities and things that don't cost a lot. I know my husband shared that we've taken David to a pet store before on the Sabbath. Or going on a family walk, going to a playground. Also, I like to incorporate like good food on Sabbath because it is about like someone taught me that like fasting and Sabbath don't really go hand in hand. It's not like you're Sabbathing, and so you should be fasting unless you're in a season fasting. Sabbathing, you should actually be enjoying the food and having a good family meal. I know in the Jewish culture they do that on Friday night. They start the Sabbath with like a good meal. So I like that. I don't always do it, but that's what I think of with delight is eating good food.
Yeah, those are some good ways. So personally, I've noticed a difference. Like you mentioned, I don't know if while we were recording or not while we're recording that, like we haven't been doing a good job with this as a family, and we were doing better. And I noticed a difference, right? There's something about the slower pace of a day. And it's hard to describe, but there is this spiritual and physical and even emotional renewal that happens when we put this into practice. But it's very difficult. Like I find for myself a lot of times on a Saturday, like I'm thinking about like I want to be productive though, and like I feel like the day is not productive if I don't get something done around the house or whatever. And so like I'm trying really hard to like put that aside and say it's productive to just spend time with the family. It's productive to even just take a nap and rest and those kinds of things. So as we close out on Sabbath and again on all of these, you hear us say like we're just trying to scratch the surface, right? There's so many more resources that we're going to point you to, but just a few Sabbath tips. One, plan for Sabbath, right? Like if you don't create a plan to maybe get some of the other things done at a different time, then that time will get eaten up very, very quickly. So when we're doing it well, something that we do is like we're kind of saying, okay, we're gonna go, on that side, we're gonna go to the pet store, or we're gonna go to the playground, or we're gonna do something like that, and we kind of have that set up. But then also prepare for it, right? And so if you're saying, okay, Saturday's will be my Sabbath, then maybe Friday afternoon is all the running around and taking care of the house and errands and those kinds of things. And then also disconnect. And that's the hardest part. I know for me, it can be easy to be on my phone a lot on the Sabbath because I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything. So like then I'm scrolling through social media and it's like hard to separate from that. But being present with people and making space to hear from the Lord is important. And then spice it up. All right. Routine kills things, right? So like it's good. Megan is really good at keeping us on task with that. Sometimes of suggesting different things for us to do. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Like we said, we went to PetSmart. Like it cost 3 cents
Can
of
I share
gas.
2 Sabbath ideas?
Yeah, sure.
Because Sabbath used to be one of my favorite topics, and I want to get back to that. But the thing with the disconnect with our phones, because we're always with our phones, one thing that someone taught me is keep your phone on and in one area, but don't have it with you at all times. So treat it like a landline that day, because you don't want to be, you may have an aging parent that needs to reach you. So it's not saying like be totally disconnected, but don't have your phone, keep it in one spot all day long, and so you're not constantly looking at it.
Good.
And then I like the preparing part too of like if you do want to cook a nice meal or just get some stuff done ahead of time. So you're not like the morning of Sabbath being like, what am I going to make today? And then having to think or have to go buy ingredients. So just having that preparing ahead of time. I liked when we first started Sabbathing, we were kind of doing that. We've fallen away from it a little bit, but those are like the 2 things that have helped me with Sabbathing.
Sure. And then I'll add there, make it annual, right? Like we should Sabbath weekly is a good thing. To set aside one day for that. But then each year, kind of whether it's actually traveling for like vacation mode or just taking some time to really decompress. And so there'll be some resources. We mentioned the Ruthless Elimination Hurry. Also, we feel like in all these disciplines, we're referencing Practice the Way, but their episodes on Sabbath are very good as well. NAF Downs has a great episode, and there's a couple other resources in there. One by Bema Discipleship, which I would encourage you. And with all podcasts and all books that we're recommending to you, it doesn't mean we necessarily agree with everything that the author would say or everything that this podcast would say, but we're just kind of highlighting this area as something that we think that they're speaking well to. And so before we go today, I want to give you a chance to get to know Riley and Megan a little better. And this is the defining question of our podcast that we ask every guest. Is pineapple an acceptable topping on pizza?
My opinion is you do you.
First one to start changing the answer a little bit.
My opinion is it is not acceptable. I do not like it.
All right, so we're starting to gain a little momentum on the pineapple people are maybe stepping up. But you personally don't like pineapple.
I do not.
Okay,
Not
but you
for
are
me.
other people.
Sure.
There have been some people on this podcast that have been very intent that it shouldn't be for nobody.
I mean, if you want it, that's fine, but don't expect me to share any pizza with you. And you better get a plain pizza for me
Right.
if we're sharing it.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us for these last 3 episodes. We appreciate you making the time. This is going to wrap up our series on the disciplines of prayer, fasting, and Sabbath. And so this is the part where you want to pause. Don't go to the next episode. Go meet with your discipler. They're going to abide in Christ with you. They're going to gospel coach you a little bit and talk through some of these disciplines. Again, these are ones that you kind of need to practice. So you can talk with your discipler about that. And then come on back for our series on stewardship and the spiritual discipline of giving or generosity. We'll see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.